This week was Canada Day, which is why, of course, we're all wearing blue. Nonetheless, what if we in Canada built a Mount Rushmore of Canadian athletes? Who would be the faces that were on that monument? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. We are looking for the 4 Canadians. It's a tough list because there's only 4 of them. You only get to pick 4. The 4 Canadians you would put on a Mount Rushmore of Canadian sports. Steve, we'll start with you. Who would be your 4?
Well, first of all, we'd never have one because we'd never deface our natural resources like that, I hope. But and it was very difficult for me as a historian to leave Bobby Rosenfeld and Lionel Conacher, for whom Athlete of the Year trophies are named after, off this, but they'd be my alternates. I'm going to go with Gretzky, Terry Fox, Marilyn Bell, and Christine Sinclair.
Just before we jump in, you have alternates? Why would you, in case one of them falls off the mountain? Is that they get replaced?
Well, this is it. Yeah, no, I'm just saying how close they were, and you throw and for those of you that don't know, Marilyn Bell was the first person to swim across Lake Ontario. She's just 16 years old. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people listened to it on the radio. Thousands waited for her to come. She swam the English Channel. She did a number of things that put Canada on the map and female sports on the map too. A bit like Terry Fox in that way.
Rick, what do you think? Who on that list surprises you from Steve?
Maybe Marilyn Bell surprises me, and I'll give you my list. Now, I also have some alternates too, and I was thinking about this because you talk about diving into a rabbit hole. This is a vortex you can get lost in. There's so many amazing Canadian athletes or representatives of athletics in Canada that can be on Canada's sports Mount Rushmore. But for me, Wayne Gretzky is there, both for what he did on and maybe more importantly off the ice. Terry Fox is there for sure. What an ambassador, what a great individual, and a living legacy that he has left us with. Christine Sinclair, another one just like Steve, someone who vaulted Canadian soccer on a new echelon. And Lionel Conacher, he's not the greatest athlete of the half century for a reason. So those are my 4.
Wow. All right, Bubba, who's your 4?
Well, I will start by saying this, and I know I might get punched in the head for it, but I'm going to leave Terry Fox off the list because to me it wasn't so much the greatest athlete. I think it was more of an accomplishment that we all respect and raise the level of consciousness for what he did. So I'm thinking when I say athlete and what at least the way it's been presented to me, I'm thinking someone that played in the league. So just there's my preface there. Wayne Gretzky, obviously, for what he did for hockey in the United States and what he did for Canada. Steve Nash for very much the same reasons for what he did for basketball in this country and abroad and raising awareness of Americans for what a Canadian can do in basketball. George Chuvalo, I think one of the more underrated Canadian athletes of all time. I mean, the man Muhammad Ali said, I gave him everything I had and could not knock him down. Fought him twice, went the 50, went the distance, both fights, could not knock down this guy. And I mean, George Chuvalo never cut. Canadian champion for many years, fought everyone. And of course, I will go with Donovan Bailey because I think over the last 20 years, no athlete, in my opinion, has created so much excitement around the country on an individual sport basis. And to me, it is an absolute. I think I'm shocked that has not received the Order of Canada. It shocks me.
I want to come back to a couple of those. I'll give you mine really quickly first, and it's familiar because I think Rick and Steve and I, and even Bubba, we've overlapped a bit here. I got Wayne Gretzky as well. I've got Terry Fox as well. And then Rick surprised me because he pulled out a name I was going to use that I thought would not be there, which was Christine Sinclair. I had her as well. And then a little bit off the grid, Fergie Jenkins for what he did in baseball and a world sport, one of the greats of all times. Until a couple months ago, the only Canadian in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Let me come back to a couple of these, though, and I want to ask a couple questions about some of the names that have come here. And let's start with Terry Fox. And I know, Bubba, your explanation is fine. My question was this, and it's not really about Terry Fox. We all think of Terry Fox the same way, and he is the pinnacle of Canadian. He's the pinnacle of that greatness and everything else. If we mention him, he comes secondarily, which is Rick Hansen. Is it all timing? If Rick Hansen had done the Man in Motion tour before Terry Fox had done his Marathon of Hope, would Rick Hansen be the guy that we're talking about on Mount Rushmore?
I think it's entirely possible. Yeah. And, you know, I get Bubba's argument, and that's fine. It's all about parameters. What do you set as the parameters, and what are the standards? And I actually, in 1980 or 81, when he was running, I had written this little tiny thing in the early Pack and Time saying, this guy's about, I think he'd done his 3rd day. He's doing a marathon a day. This guy should be our athlete of the year. And apparently CP picked it up, and Fox saw it on the way. And it's in I think it's in Leslie Scrivener's book, to say that to recognize it as a sporting achievement was very important to him. So I'm gonna stick with that on the sports side. As my argument is that he felt it was a sporting thing. But I think you're right. If it had been Hansen, and that brings me around to somebody else that I couldn't mention, but, you know, if the thing was, let's say there were 8 or 10, Chantal Petitclerc, who's the greatest, our greatest wheelchair athlete of all time. But I think, yeah, I think you're right. If he had done that first, that it might have been him that we were looking at. But we don't know. You can't say.
We don't know.
Because it's just, you're just comparing one thing, which is time. You're not comparing other things. They're both very...
well, they're both on a majestic scale, and yet
majestic is exactly the
gets
word.
lost. And now, Bubba, you also mentioned Donovan Bailey. This one has always, I've always had a theory about this, that Donovan Bailey did and still pays the price for Ben Johnson. That when Donovan Bailey won, everybody just kept expecting the shoe to drop and something to happen and the steroid test to come back positive for Donovan Bailey. And because of that, he never got the same appreciation, love, whatever, because we were living in fear of committing ourselves emotionally to him again and having another Ben Johnson.
But whose fault is that? Is that Donovan Bailey's fault
No,
or
it's
our
Ben Johnson's fault.
Well, I don't even know. I think it's our fault. I think that's the Canadians' fault. That's this guilt that we seem to carry that many countries would not observe. That we wouldn't feel like we had this Dublin inquiry where we were so interested in. I mean, hey, drug use has been going on in sports for ages and ages. And what Ben Johnson did was criminal more to himself than anyone else. And I think that Donovan Bailey shouldn't have had to pay for the crimes that he committed, if you want to call it a crime. And I think we should have all moved on from that. If anything, Scott, it should have wiped the slate clean for athletics in this country and what an athlete can do under an amazing circumstance, full knowing Donovan's story of a guy that never grew up wanting to be a sprinter, a guy that started in his early 20s to become a sprinter, and what he accomplished. I'm telling you this. And can maybe compare to a lot of the athletes. And I think this is why Donovan Bailey's on my list. I think we also often forget how big track and field is around the world. Donovan Bailey can walk into any place in Europe and people would identify him as the former fastest, or I don't think you ever lose that title, as a fastest man in the world and an Olympic gold medalist and a multiple-time world champion. So I think
wait a second, isn't Michael Johnson the fastest man in the world?
No, the chicken pulled up lame.
Yeah, that's true. Rick, what do you think? Did Donovan Bailey pay the price because of Ben Johnson?
Yeah, I think I was going to say a little bit, probably a lot, because, yeah, there was that expectation, I think is maybe the most accurate word, that, sometime down the line, he's going to get caught because he did something. But, that never materialized. He never was. He ran clean. He ran fast. He was still, during his competition years, was the fastest guy on this planet, beat Johnson at that tremendous 150 sprint off at the Dome. Maybe he paid the price early on in his career, but as his career developed and as he started winning gold medals and Olympic titles, I think that diminished. But certainly early on in his career, he had a mountain to climb in terms of getting to the top of his sport and kind of deflecting all the negativity that Johnson created.
There's a bit of a thing here we're missing is, and Donovan, actually, he would have been my guy up there if I didn't have Marilyn Bell, and I suppose maybe I was trying to do women, men a little bit there, but Donovan Bailey, because of, as you mentioned, Bubba, that because everybody in the world can run. It's the sport that every single person could do if they're not just if they're able to. But I mean, it's available to everybody. You don't need special facilities. That's why it's always been considered the fastest man in the world, because anybody can try it. You don't have to have special facilities to do it. But what Donovan Bailey always said was it was Bruni Surin who really bore the brunt of Ben Johnson. He was a little bit of that buffer there. I think one of the reasons that a lot of Canadians were waiting and he hasn't maybe got his due is because sometimes people didn't like exactly how proud of a man Donovan Bailey is, and outwardly proud. And I've always loved that about him. When he was 19 years old, the Hamilton Spectator Indoor Games, which were huge at the time, it was the second biggest indoor meet in North America. He was supposed to be part of it. And because they got some guy from the U.S. who was actually a sprinter, and Donovan was in his first year, I think he was about maybe 19 sprinting, but he was great. He was already as good as the best 19-year-old we had, and probably the best 19-year-old in North America. Our meet director bounced him, and Donovan was very vocal about it at 19 years old. What are you doing? And he always had something against the Hamilton Games after that, and it started back then. So I think that was part of it too, that he hasn't got his due, Bubba. As part of that is that he stands up for himself. He really stands up for himself. I love that.
I don't know why a man should be penalized for that. And
I don't.
Again, no, and I understand that. I think we as Canadians seem to deflect that. We try to run away from that when a man does actually have something to say and doesn't say the status quo or hide from the media. We get our backs up, and I've always been bothered by that, and in some ways, in a little way, admire Americans for that when it comes to their athletes who actually speak up and say something. So again, I will bring it up again. Remember, and again, I have Gretzky on the list and Steve Nash on the list. Donovan Bailey beat the best in the world, not just in Canada, not just North America, not the Commonwealth, the best in the world for an extended amount of time. He was the best, the #1 ranked sprinter in the world. And again, raised moments in us that we will never forget at the Olympics and some of these world championships. And again, how he does not have the honor of Canada.
Order of
to
Canada,
me,
yeah. I didn't realize, Bubba, I didn't realize that was the case. And I go back.
I have to check again, but I'm almost sure he has not received that honor. And if I was him, that would bother me.
There's a lot of things he should have received. There should be more big things named after him, not just a little park in Oakville.
I go back to my point about Terry Fox and Rick Hansen. I think sometimes chronology makes a difference. And I really do believe that if Donovan Bailey had come before Ben Johnson, Donovan Bailey would be seen as a much more glorious figure in this country. I mean, look, Ben Johnson, when he was at his peak, there was no bigger athlete. I mean, I don't know that Wayne Gretzky was bigger than Ben Johnson at his apex. And then it crashed, of course. But it showed that we were open to loving a sprinter, and we were open to loving a sprinter. Didn't matter where he was from or what color or anything else. We wanted that guy to succeed, and we just got slapped in the face by Ben Johnson, and I think that created the doubt, the whatever. Now, while I just
but Scott, we're so proud. Like when Donovan won, we were so proud to wave.
Oh yeah.
We were so proud to say, Here, look at us, a Jamaican that comes to Canada. We're so proud to claim him as ours.
That relay team. We loved it.
Yet we're so concerned. We're so worried that, will he test positive because of one bad apple? And to me, that just doesn't make a lot of sense.
I'm not sure
that was a big apple.
I think he was. I don't think it was just Johnson. I think that there was a doubt about the entire sport at that time. Everybody was. I mean, it wasn't just. I mean, he's Canadian, so we noticed it most. But the whole sprinting, the whole track and field, the whole sprinting world.
Steve, you're absolutely right. But yet, I'm going to tell you this because this is just the way I see it. We as Canadians, we're very proud to call him ours, right? And you're right. Maybe the sport might have been dirty. I mean, and that was getting to a point. But we can't sit here and say, hey, Donovan Bailey, he's Canadian, right? And then sit there and say, but the sport. I don't know if you can have it both ways.
Well, you don't get that.
I just think it just took Ben Johnson and that Dublin inquiry it made us cautious. I believe it made us cautious, and that hurt Donovan Bailey. I absolutely believe that unfairly, because Donovan Bailey never had a whiff of bad about him. And so,
Well, I guess he went out still shocking the world, eh?
yeah, well, no, I think so. I think so. Well, one more thing about this. We all came up with Wayne Gretzky. So Wayne Gretzky, I mean, it's an obvious choice, but why not Bobby Orr?
Yeah, Bobby Orr, I think, is considered one of the greatest hockey players of all time. Him, Gordie Howe, Wayne Gretzky, your top three. There's your trifecta of greatness on the ice, and you might supplant another name in there if you dare. But more of what Gretzky did for the sport was off the ice in building it as what it is today in the U.S. If he was not traded from Edmonton to Los Angeles, I think we can all agree that hockey in the U.S. wouldn't be as big as it is today. And he was the overwhelming reason for why it grew so large when it did and why it did. And he was a main focal point of that. Playing in New York as well also helped it along, but it was that initial trade to Los Angeles that kind of vaulted the sport of hockey in the U.S.
Well, there's a hint of an ambassadorship to everything we've been talking about here, at least the people we put up there, right? And ambassadorship comes in a lot of forms. One of the way is the way that Rick mentions it here. A lot of it is, how do you sell a country around the world? Some of it you can just do as Donovan did by just being the best and saying, we don't sit in the backseat. Donovan was very much like what came out of the Vancouver Olympics, the new Canadian attitude. He had it many, many years beforehand. I congratulate him on that. But part of it is ambassadorship. And I think that's what Gretzky brings over the other guys.
And it's funny, and in that same comparison to what you're saying, Steve, is that why Mario Lemieux isn't on many of our lists?
Yes.
Maybe because to me, Mario was every as good as Wayne Gretzky was as a player. Yep. But the guy didn't like microphones, plain and simple.
Or played like sometimes he didn't like the game. Mm-hmm. And he said that, actually, and he was right. It was a garage league at that time, as we found out when we changed the rules and saw what hockey could be compared to the era that he played in. And I think that's part of it. I think you're exactly right on, Bub.
Just before I tell you watching that we'd love to find out from you who would be on your Mount Rushmore, let me just share one little story, Bubba, about your Donovan Bailey pick. Years ago, I was working at a different paper, and I wrote a column prior to that 150-meter race with Michael Johnson. And I said, one of these two guys is not finishing the race because there's too much money to be lost by losing in this one. And they decided that was a stupid opinion and didn't run the column. And today, it's like, how could you done that to me? That was my one moment of brilliant prediction, but I remember. Who put on your Mount Rushmore of Canadian sports athletes? It doesn't have to be any of the people that we've just suggested. Give us your list. Comment. Subscribe down below. Follow us. We do these regularly. We would love to have you follow along. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.